Lyra's hands shook as she arranged the bolts of fabric across her merchant stall. Each piece represented months of careful weaving from her homeworld. Threads dyed in colors that shifted under different types of light. This was her first solo trading mission to Frontier Station 7, and everything needed to be perfect. Her family had invested their savings into this venture, trusting her to establish new trade relationships with species they had only seen in holographic broadcasts. The trading deck buzzed with activity. Dozens of alien species moved through the corridors, their voices creating a symphony of clicks, chirps, and sounds Lyra's translator struggled to process. She focused on her work, trying to ignore the overwhelming sensory input. Her people, the Quelan, preferred quiet spaces and gentle interactions. This chaotic environment pushed every one of her comfort boundaries. A heavy thud made her jump. Someone was moving cargo containers in the stall next to hers. Lyra glanced over and saw a human, muscular and efficient in his movements. She had studied humans during her preparation for this trip. They came from a planet classified as a death world, a place so hostile that survival required constant adaptation. But they were also prolific traders, and doing business with them could transform her family's fortune. The human noticed her watching and smiled. "Hey there, neighbor. Name's Sam. Looks like we'll be working side by side for the next few cycles." Lyra's skin rippled with pale blue patterns, a Quillan response indicating cautious greeting. "I am Lyra. This is my first time at this station." "First time's always the toughest," Sam said, lifting another container with ease. "You'll get used to the noise and the crowd. Just takes a day or two." Then Lyra saw it. A creature emerged from behind one of Sam's cargo containers, and her entire body went rigid. The thing was massive, easily reaching Sam's waist. It had a broad head, powerful jaws, and moved with the confident gait of something that had never been prey in its entire evolutionary history. Dark fur covered its muscular frame, and when it opened its mouth to pant, Lyra saw teeth designed for tearing flesh. Her scanner activated automatically, a panic response hardwired into her species. The device projected information directly into her field of vision. Terran canine. Subspecies Rottweiler. Bite force 328 pounds per square inch. Descended from pack hunters. Capable of bringing down prey 3 times its size. Predatory instincts high. Danger level extreme. Lyra's skin flashed bright yellow, the Quillan distress signal. She stumbled backward, knocking over the carefully arranged display she had spent an hour perfecting. Bolts of fabric tumbled to the floor, unrolling in chaotic patterns. The creature's head swiveled toward her. It made direct eye contact, and Lyra felt her legs weaken. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to do anything except stand frozen in the predator's gaze. "Duke, sit, stay." Sam's voice was firm but calm. The creature immediately dropped its haunches to the floor and remained motionless. Its tail, which had been swaying slightly, stopped moving. The predator obeyed the human's command without hesitation. Sam quickly moved between Lyra and the creature. "Hey, I'm really sorry. I should have warned you. Are you okay?" Lyra couldn't speak. Her translator provided words, but her throat wouldn't cooperate. She managed a small nod, though her entire body continued to tremble. "Duke's not going to hurt you," Sam said gently. "He's my service animal. He's trained to help me with a medical condition. I know he looks scary, but I promise he's completely safe." Service animal. The term filtered through Lyra's panic. She had read about this human concept during her research, but the files had been vague. Something about domesticated creatures performing tasks for humans with disabilities. The reality of seeing a predator calmly sitting in a civilian trading area, surrounded by potential prey species, had not been adequately conveyed in the educational materials. "That is a predator," Lyra finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "From your death world." "Well, yeah," Sam admitted. "But dogs have lived with humans for thousands of years. We evolved together. Duke here has been with me for 5 years. He saved my life more times than I can count." Lyra's analytical mind began to override her panic response, though her body still trembled. "You brought a predator into space, to a civilian station, where herbivorous species conduct trade." Sam's expression shifted to something resembling guilt, mixed with frustration. "I have the proper permits. Duke is certified as a medical service animal. Under interspecies trade agreements, stations have to accommodate disability assistance. even if the assistance comes in a form that some species find frightening. An alarm chimed at Lyra's merchant pad. Station security was responding to her distress beacon. Within moments, 2 security officers arrived, their weapons drawn but not aimed. One was a bird-like creature with iridescent feathers. The other was a stocky being that reminded Lyra of the rock formations on her homeworld. "We received a predator alert," the bird-like officer said, his eyes fixed on Duke. "Sir, you're aware that Deathworld predators require special containment protocols in civilian areas." Sam sighed and pulled out a data chip. "My permits are all current. Duke is a certified service animal. I've been trading at this station for 3 years without incident." The security officer scanned the chip, and his feathers ruffled in what Lyra recognized as irritation. "The paperwork is legitimate," he admitted. "However, this is the 3rd distress call we've received today related to your animal's presence. Multiple merchants have relocated to other sections of the station to avoid this area." Lyra watched the exchange with growing concern. Sam might lose his trading spot because of her overreaction. Despite her fear, she felt a pang of guilt. Her family had taught her that fair dealings required understanding different perspectives, even when those perspectives came from species that would have eaten her ancestors. "I overreacted," Lyra heard herself say. The security officers turned to look at her. "I was not adequately prepared to encounter a Terran predator. But perhaps I could learn more about why humans consider these creatures helpful rather than dangerous." Sam's face lit up with gratitude. The security officers exchanged glances, then the bird-like one spoke. "If the affected party is willing to resolve this informally, we'll allow it. But sir, one more panic response and you'll be required to relocate to the restricted trading zones." After the security officers left, Sam knelt down and began helping Lyra collect her scattered fabrics. Duke remained sitting, exactly where Sam had commanded him to stay, watching both of them with calm brown eyes that showed no malice, only patient curiosity. "Thank you," Sam said quietly. "I know that was hard for you." Lyra carefully folded a bolt of fabric, her hands still shaking slightly. "What does a service animal do exactly?" Sam smiled. "How about I show you, but maybe from a comfortable distance, at least for now." Despite everything in her evolutionary history telling her to refuse, Lyra found herself nodding. She had come to this station to learn about other species and their ways of doing business. She had not expected her education to include understanding why humans chose to live alongside creatures that should be their enemies. Duke's tail began to wag slowly. A gesture Lyra didn't yet understand but would soon learn meant friendship offered without conditions or expectations. 3 days had passed since Lyra's first encounter with Duke, and she still positioned her stall displays to create a clear sightline to Sam's area while maintaining maximum distance. She told herself it was strategic observation, not cowardice. Understanding potential threats was simple survival instinct, nothing more. Sam proved to be an excellent neighbor despite the terrifying creature at his side. He had helped Lyra repair her display stand when it collapsed under the weight of her heavier fabric bolts. He shared information about which species preferred which colors and textures, saving her from several potentially embarrassing sales mistakes. He even introduced her to other merchants, helping her build the network of contacts she desperately needed. But Duke remained a constant source of anxiety. The creature seemed content to lie beside Sam's stall, occasionally shifting positions but mostly just watching the flow of traffic through the trading deck. Lyra found herself studying the animal despite her fear, trying to reconcile the predator biology with its calm behavior. She noticed patterns. When Sam stood for extended periods, Duke would nudge his leg with that broad head and Sam would sit down for a few minutes. When Sam dropped small tools or data chips, Duke would pick them up in his mouth and return them, somehow never leaving tooth marks on the delicate equipment. Most surprisingly, when children of various species approached, Duke's entire demeanor shifted to something even gentler than his normal state. A human child, perhaps 4 or 5 years old by Lyra's estimation, had wandered over to Sam's stall while her parents examined goods several stalls away. The little girl stared at Duke with wide eyes full of wonder rather than fear. "Puppy," she squealed, reaching out with both hands. Sam quickly intercepted her. "Hold on there, sweetie. You need to ask first before petting someone's dog. Duke is working right now, which means he needs to focus on helping me. But if your parents say it's okay, you can pet him later when he's on break." The child's lower lip trembled, but she nodded. Sam called out to her parents, who hurried over looking embarrassed. After a brief conversation, they agreed to return during Sam's rest period. Lyra absorbed this interaction. The predator was working. The concept still seemed absurd, yet she couldn't deny what she observed. Duke wasn't simply accompanying Sam. The creature had specific responsibilities and performed them with consistent reliability. Later that afternoon, Lyra witnessed something that forced her to reconsider everything she thought she understood about Death World predators. Sam was reaching for a container on his upper storage rack when his body suddenly went rigid. His face drained of color and his hand trembled violently. Duke reacted instantly. The animal stood and pressed his body firmly against Sam's legs. He pawed at Sam's thigh insistently, making a low whining sound that cut through the ambient noise of the trading deck. "Not now, buddy," Sam muttered, but his words were slurred. "Got customers coming." Duke increased his pawing, more urgent now. He positioned himself directly in front of Sam and refused to move. Sam tried to step around him, and Duke blocked his path again. "Fine," Sam said, his voice thick. He tapped his merchant pad, activating an automated message that his stall would be closed for a brief medical break. Then he sat down heavily on a storage container, and Duke immediately climbed up beside him, pressing close. Sam's entire body began to convulse. Lyra's instinct was to call for medical assistance, but Duke's behavior stopped her. The animal wasn't panicking or running for help. Instead, he was wrapping himself around Sam, positioning his body to prevent Sam from falling off the container. Duke's head pressed against Sam's chest, and somehow the steady presence seemed to anchor the human through whatever was happening. The seizure lasted perhaps 30 seconds, though it felt much longer to Lyra. When it ended, Sam slumped forward, and Duke adjusted his position to support the human's weight. They stayed like that for several minutes, Sam breathing heavily while Duke remained absolutely still, providing stability and warmth. Finally, Sam raised his head and wrapped his arms around Duke's neck. "Good boy," he whispered. "You caught it early. Good boy." Duke's tail wagged, the first movement he had made since the seizure began. Sam pulled a treat from his pocket and offered it. Duke took it gently, his massive jaws careful not to accidentally catch Sam's fingers. Lyra found herself moving closer without consciously deciding to do so. Her fear hadn't vanished, but curiosity was proving stronger. "Are you well?" she called out. Sam looked up, surprise evident on his face. "Yeah, I'm okay. Duke warned me in time so I could sit down safely. If he hadn't, I might have fallen and cracked my skull open on these metal containers." "The creature knew you would have a seizure before it happened. Dogs can detect changes in human body chemistry," Sam explained. "Duke picks up on something, probably a scent I release before a seizure about 5 to 10 minutes before it hits. Gives me time to get somewhere safe." Lyra processed this information. "Your people trained a predator to detect medical emergencies and provide physical support during vulnerability moments. When you are at your weakest, this creature protects you rather than exploiting your helplessness." Sam smiled. "I never thought about it that way, but yeah, that's exactly what he does. Duke's job is to keep me alive and functioning. He's been doing it for 5 years now. I'd be dead or seriously injured without him. This is why the permits classify him as medical equipment rather than simply a pet," Lyra said, understanding clicking into place. "Right. Though he's definitely more than equipment to me. Duke's family, another human concept that didn't quite translate properly. Lyra's people used family to mean genetic relatives who shared responsibility for offspring survival. Humans apparently extended the term to include members of entirely different species, even predators whose ancestors had likely hunted human ancestors. A commotion near the main trading entrance pulled Lyra's attention away from her thoughts. A young alien from a species she didn't recognize had wandered away from its guardian group. The child was heading directly toward a power coupling that sparked with dangerous energy, attracted by the bright flashes like so many young beings across the galaxy. Duke's head snapped up. He looked at Sam, then at the child, then back at Sam. Some wordless communication passed between them because Sam nodded once and said, "Go." Duke leaped from the container and ran. His powerful legs covered the distance in seconds. Lyra's heart seized, certain she was about to witness a predator attacking a helpless child. Every evolutionary instinct screamed warnings about apex hunters and their prey selection. Instead, Duke grabbed the child's clothing in his teeth and pulled backward. The child yelped in surprise but wasn't hurt. Duke dragged the young alien away from the dangerous power coupling and then released them gently. He positioned his body between the child and the hazard, then let out a series of loud barks that immediately attracted adult attention. The child's guardians rushed over, their expressions cycling from terror to confusion to gratitude in rapid succession. They scooped up their offspring while Duke simply sat calmly, tail wagging, accepting their stammered thanks with patient dignity. Sam jogged over, slightly out of breath. "Sorry about that. Duke has a strong protective instinct. He sees a kid in danger, and he's going to intervene regardless of what species they are." One of the guardians, a tall being with translucent skin, stared at Duke with wonder. "This is a Terran predator. It saved my child." "I do not understand." "That's what good dogs do," Sam said simply. "They protect the pack, and Duke's pack includes pretty much anyone who needs help." The guardians left, still looking confused but no longer afraid. Lyra watched Duke trot back to Sam's stall and resume his usual position lying on the floor. The creature's eyes closed, and within minutes he appeared to be sleeping, as if risking himself to save an alien child was simply routine behavior. Lyra returned to her stall, but her hands moved automatically through her work while her mind struggled with what she had witnessed. This predator had demonstrated judgment, medical knowledge, protective instincts toward beings it had never seen before, and loyalty to a human who was vulnerable rather than dominant. Everything her species had learned about predators over millions of years of evolution suggested they should be avoided, feared, and certainly never trusted. Yet here was living evidence that perhaps the Quillan understanding was incomplete. Perhaps humans had learned something about the universe that her people had missed while hiding in their underground cities. Duke raised his head and looked directly at Lyra. She didn't flinch this time. The creature's eyes held intelligence and something that looked remarkably like kindness. His tail thumped once against the floor, then he laid his head back down and returned to his rest. For the first time since arriving at Frontier Station 7, Lyra considered that her fear might be the real obstacle to understanding, not the predator lying peacefully 20 feet away. Lyra had just completed her largest sale of the trip when the alarm began. The sound was nothing like the gentle warning chimes her people used on their homeworld. This was harsh, urgent, designed to cut through the chaos of a multi-species trading station and demand immediate attention. Red lights flooded the trading deck, pulsing in rhythm with the alarm. Lyra's translator automatically prioritized the emergency broadcast over all other audio input. Containment breach in chemical storage Bay 14. Toxic atmospheric contamination detected. All personnel must evacuate to emergency shelters immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Panic erupted instantly. Hundreds of beings from dozens of species began pushing toward the exits simultaneously. Lyra grabbed her datapad containing her sales records and tried to join the flow. But the crowd moved like a living thing with its own terrible momentum. She was small compared to many of the species around her, and the larger beings simply pushed past without noticing they were shoving her off balance. She lost her footing and stumbled into a side corridor, trying to escape the crush of bodies. By the time she regained her balance, the main crowd had passed, and she stood alone in an unfamiliar section of the station. Her sense of direction, usually reliable, failed her completely. Every corridor looked identical with its metal walls and harsh lighting. Lyra consulted her datapad, but the station map refused to load properly. The emergency had disrupted some of the network functions. She picked a direction and ran, hoping it would lead to safety. The corridor began to fill with a greenish mist that seeped from the ventilation grates. Lyra's eyes immediately began burning. Her respiratory system, designed for her homeworld's clean atmosphere, rebelled against the contaminated air. She coughed, and each breath became harder to draw than the last. She needed to find an emergency shelter, but which direction? The mist was getting thicker and her vision was blurring. She pressed her sleeve against her mouth and nose, trying to filter the air, but it barely helped. A shape emerged from the mist. For a moment, Lyra thought she was hallucinating. Duke appeared like something from a nightmare, his dark form barely visible through the green haze. Behind him came Sam, moving quickly despite the poor visibility. Duke went straight to Lyra and grabbed her sleeve with his teeth. He pulled insistently, trying to move her in a specific direction. Lyra was too disoriented to resist. Sam reached her a moment later, his eyes red and watering from the chemicals. Wrong way, he gasped. Shelter is back this direction. Come on. He pulled a cloth from his pocket, dunked it in water from his canteen, and tied it around Lyra's face. He made a second one for himself. The wet fabric helped filter some of the contamination, but breathing was still painful. Duke pulled at Lyra's sleeve again, more urgent this time. Sam put a hand on her shoulder. Follow Duke, he knows the way. I promise. Trusting a predator went against every instinct Lyra possessed, but she was out of options. Duke led them through the corridors at a pace that was fast, but not so fast that they couldn't keep up. The animal stopped at each intersection, his nose working as he tested the air, then confidently chose a direction. They reached a section where the mist was particularly thick. Lyra could barely see Sam, who was right beside her. But Duke kept moving, his dark shape a constant guide ahead of them. How could he navigate when even the station's emergency lighting was barely visible? Sam must have sensed her confusion. Dogs have incredible sense of smell, he wheezed. Duke walked this entire station with me when we first arrived. He's got a mental map of every corridor. He's also tracking clean air currents leading us away from the worst contamination. They came to a sealed emergency door. Sam fumbled with the control panel, but his hands were shaking from the chemical exposure. Lyra tried to help, but her vision was too blurred to read the symbols properly. Duke barked, a sharp sound that cut through their panic. Then he did something Lyra would have thought impossible. The animal reared up on his hind legs and pressed his front paws against a different panel, one marked with a biohazard symbol. The panel recognized mammalian contact and activated an emergency override, designed to help injured personnel access safety. The door slid open, revealing a maintenance shaft. The air inside was clearer, the ventilation system separate from the main corridors. Sam practically pushed Lyra inside, then followed with Duke right behind him. They climbed down the shaft, their movements clumsy and desperate. Lyra's limbs felt weak, her coordination suffering from the toxic exposure. Twice she nearly fell, and both times Duke was there, positioning his body to brace her, giving her something solid to lean against while she regained her balance. The shaft led to a lower level where the air was finally breathable. They emerged into a corridor that led directly to an emergency shelter. The massive doors were still open and beings were crowding inside. Sam, Lyra, and Duke stumbled through just as the doors began their automated closing sequence. Inside, emergency medical personnel rushed to help the last arrivals. A medic led Lyra to a decontamination station and began treating her burning eyes and irritated respiratory system. Another medic checked Sam. Duke was examined by a veterinary specialist who happened to be sheltering there, a being from a species that kept domesticated animals of their own. Lyra sat on a bench after treatment, her body shaking from the experience. She had come within minutes of dying in those contaminated corridors. If Duke hadn't found her, if Sam hadn't been willing to risk additional exposure to help her, she would have collapsed in that green mist and never woken up. Duke approached slowly, his posture non-threatening. He sat directly in front of Lyra and looked up at her with those brown eyes that held far more awareness than she had credited. His tail gave a tentative wag. Lyra's hand moved before her brain could interfere with reasoned arguments about predator protocols and safety distances. She reached out and touched Duke's head. His fur was coarse but not unpleasant. He leaned into her touch and she felt the warmth of his body, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "You saved my life," she said quietly. Duke's tail wagged harder. Sam walked over, medical patches visible on his arms where the chemicals had caused skin irritation. "He didn't even hesitate," Sam said, his voice rough from coughing. The emergency alarm went off and Duke immediately started searching. "I think he was tracking your scent from the trading deck. He led me straight to you through corridors I didn't even recognize." "I do not understand your species," Lyra admitted, her hand still resting on Duke's head. "You evolved on a world that tried to kill you at every opportunity. Predators, diseases, weather, geology, everything was hostile. Yet instead of becoming cruel or violent, you learned to make friends with the very creatures that should be your enemies. How?" Sam sat down beside her and Duke moved to position himself between them, his head now resting on Lyra's leg. "I think it's because we were never the strongest or fastest or most dangerous thing on Earth. We had to be smart. We had to cooperate. And somewhere along the way we figured out that the scary animal trying to steal our food might actually make a better partner than an enemy. Took thousands of years, lots of failure, and probably more than a few of our ancestors getting eaten in the process. But eventually we ended up with dogs. Lyra stroked Duke's fur, the action becoming more natural with each repetition. Your people turned evolution into a partnership. Something like that. We changed them and they changed us. Now we can't imagine existing without each other. Around them, the emergency shelter filled with other beings who had made it to safety. Lyra noticed several of them staring at her with confusion. Aquilin, sitting calmly with a Terran predator, showing no signs of distress, went against everything most species understood about natural behavior. An announcement came through the shelter's communication system. The contamination was being cleared. It would take several hours, but the station would be safe again. Everyone was to remain in the shelters until the all-clear was given. Lyra settled back against the wall, her hand still touching Duke. The creature had closed his eyes, apparently content to rest. She thought about her family back home, how they would react when she told them this story. A predator had saved her life, had risked contamination and injury to find her when she was lost, had protected her without expecting anything in return. The Quilin had survived by hiding, by avoiding danger, by staying away from anything that might hurt them. They had built a civilization underground, away from their world's surface threats. It was a valid survival strategy, but Lyra suddenly saw its limitations. Humans had survived by doing the opposite. They walked toward danger, studied it, understood it, and somehow transformed it into cooperation. They took wolves and made them into partners. They took a planet trying to kill them and turned it into a home they loved fiercely. "Thank you," Lyra said to Duke, knowing he couldn't understand her words but hoping he might understand the tone. "Thank you for teaching me that fear is not the only way to survive." Duke's tail thumped against the floor and he shifted closer to her warmth. Sam smiled and closed his eyes, trusting both his dog and his new friend to keep watch while he rested. In the emergency shelter, surrounded by dozens of species all waiting for safety to return, a Quilin and a Deathworld predator rested together. It was a small moment, insignificant in the vast scope of galactic events, but it represented something profound. Fear could be overcome. Enemies could become family. And sometimes the most terrifying creatures in the universe had the gentlest hearts. The hours in the emergency shelter passed slowly. Station maintenance crews worked to flush the contaminated atmosphere and repair the chemical storage bay. Medical personnel moved through the crowded space, checking on those who had been exposed to the toxic gas. Lyra received a second treatment for her respiratory irritation, but the medic assured her she would fully recover. She remained sitting next to Sam and Duke, finding unexpected comfort in their presence. Other survivors gave them space, creating a bubble of isolation that Lyra initially attributed to continued fear of the predator. But she soon noticed something different in their stares. It was not just fear. It was confusion mixed with curiosity. A being approached them, moving with fluid grace that reminded Lyra of flowing water. The creature stood nearly 8 feet tall, composed of what appeared to be living crystal that refracted the shelter's lighting into rainbow patterns. Lyra's database identified the species as Krell, one of the older civilizations in the Galactic Council. "Forgive my intrusion," the Krell said, their voice resonating like wind chimes. "I am Foster, an observer for the Galactic Council's Integration Committee. I witnessed your arrival at this shelter and would very much like to document your experience if you are willing to share it." Sam sat up straighter, suddenly wary. "Document it for what purpose?" "Earth has petitioned for Galactic Council membership 14 times, Foster explained. Each petition has been rejected. One of the primary concerns is your species' relationship with Deathworld predators. The Council struggles to understand why humans bring dangerous creatures into space, viewing it as evidence of recklessness or perhaps underlying aggression. Lyra felt Duke tense slightly under her hand. The animal sensed Sam's emotional shift even before Sam's expression changed. "Duke isn't dangerous," Sam said flatly. "He's a service animal. He saved my life more times than I can count, and today he saved Lyra's life too." Foster's crystalline body pulsed with soft light. "I witnessed the rescue. It was quite remarkable. I would like to understand it better. And I would like to record testimony from both of you, as well as any others who have interacted with your companion. The Council makes decisions based on evidence and observation. Perhaps it is time they observe something beyond their preconceptions." Lyra looked at Sam, then at Duke. Then back at Foster, I will share my testimony. But I want it understood that I speak only from my own experience. I cannot represent my entire species. Your individual perspective is precisely what I seek, Foster assured her. Over the next hour, Lyra recounted her experiences. She described her initial terror, the physical response her body had to Duke's presence, her certainty that she was looking at a creature that existed only to hunt and kill. She explained how observation had slowly changed her understanding, how watching Duke work had revealed complexities her evolutionary programming never considered possible. She told Foster about the seizure, about Duke's early warning system and protective positioning. She described the rescue in the contaminated corridors, Duke's navigation abilities, his apparent concern for her well-being, despite being a completely different species that should register as either threat or prey to his predator brain. He chose to help me, Lyra said, her hand still resting on Duke's back. Sam could have gone directly to safety. Duke could have led Sam to the shelter and left me to die. Instead, this predator, this creature that should only care about survival, risked his own life to save mine. I cannot reconcile this behavior with anything I was taught about how the universe works. Foster recorded everything, their crystalline structure somehow capturing not just words, but emotional context. Other beings in the shelter began to gather, listening to Lyra's testimony. A few started sharing their own observations. An elderly merchant from a species Lyra didn't recognize spoke up. I have been trading at this station for 15 cycles. I have watched this human and his animal. At first I requested a stall transfer to avoid them, but I am old and moving goods is difficult for me. The human offered help. His animal carried my lighter containers in a vest designed for this purpose. I was terrified, but the predator was gentle with my goods and never showed aggression. A young parent holding a small child added their voice. My daughter has nightmares. She fears the dark and enclosed spaces. We came through this shelter before during a drill, and she panicked. The human's animal approached very slowly and lay down beside her. He did not touch her, did not move aggressively. He simply offered his presence. My daughter stopped crying. She fell asleep with her hand touching his fur. I do not understand how a predator can offer comfort, but I witnessed it. An engineer stepped forward. 2 cycles ago, I was performing maintenance on the lower decks. A gas line developed a leak. My sensors did not detect it immediately, but the animal did. He began barking, insistent and loud. The human investigated and found the leak. Their report allowed us to repair it before it became critical. The animal's senses exceeded our technology. More voices joined in. Some told stories of Duke's calm presence, helping to de-escalate tense situations between arguing merchants. Others described how the animal seemed to recognize when beings were ill or distressed, offering comfort without being asked. A few mentioned how human children interacted with Duke, learning gentleness and respect through their contact with a creature powerful enough to harm them, but choosing not to. Foster recorded it all. This is extraordinary, they said. I have observed dozens of species across hundreds of worlds. I have never encountered anything quite like this. The relationship between humans and these animals is not dominance, not simply training, not even just partnership. It appears to be something deeper. Sam had been quiet during most of the testimonies, but now he spoke. It's love. That's the word humans use. Duke loves me and I love him. It's not complicated or scientific. We're family. We take care of each other. Love between predator and prey, Foster mused. Between species so different that they should not even be able to communicate effectively, yet somehow understanding each other perfectly. The Council has been analyzing human petition from the wrong angle. They have been asking whether humans can be trusted despite bringing predators into space. They should have been asking what it means that humans can form these bonds at all. A new voice cut through the conversation. It means humans are either incredibly foolish or incredibly dangerous. The speaker was a tall, muscular being covered in scales that shifted from green to gray as he moved. Lyra recognized the species as Drelith, one of the warrior cultures that held significant influence in the Galactic Council. This particular Drelith wore military insignia marking him as an officer. Commander Brix, Foster acknowledged. I did not realize you were aboard the station. I arrived this morning for a security inspection, Brix said, his tone sharp. And what do I find? A death world predator roaming freely through civilian areas. And now I hear testimony treating this as admirable rather than alarming. Sam stood, putting himself between Brix and Duke. Duke is legally permitted to be here. We have all the proper documentation. Paperwork does not change nature, Brix countered. That creature is a predator. You have conditioned it to obey through dominance or fear or whatever methods your species employs. But conditioning is not loyalty. It is not partnership. It is slavery wearing a friendlier face. Duke remained calm, though his eyes tracked Brix's movements. The animal seemed to understand this being represented a threat. If not physical, then ideological. Duke chooses to be with me, Sam said, his voice steady. Every day he chooses to stay. He could run. He could refuse commands. But he doesn't because we're partners. He understands that we need each other. Brix laughed, a harsh sound. You attribute complex reasoning to an animal. It follows you because it has been trained to follow. It has no choice in the matter. Lyra stood as well, her earlier fear of confrontation overridden by a surge of indignation. I watched this animal make choices today. He chose to search for me in contaminated corridors. He chose to guide us to safety. He chose to comfort frightened beings who are strangers to him. These are not the behaviors of a slave following programming. These are the choices of someone who cares. You are prey species, Brix said dismissively. You see what you wish to see because the alternative is admitting you are standing beside something that could kill you in seconds. Then let Duke prove it, Foster interjected. Commander Brix, you claim the animal operates through conditioning and fear. Test this theory. Give commands as Sam does. If Duke is merely a trained automaton, he will obey anyone who uses the correct signals. If he is truly partnered with Sam specifically, he will respond differently to a stranger. Brix considered this, then nodded. Very well. Human, what command does your animal know? Sam hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Duke knows dozens of commands, but I don't think this is necessary. It is absolutely necessary, Foster said gently. If humanity is to gain council membership, these questions must be answered. Demonstrate the truth of your bond. Sam sighed and looked at Duke. It's okay, buddy. Just be yourself. He told Brix several basic commands and the hand signals that accompanied them. Brix attempted them, his movements precise and his tone authoritative. Sit, Brix commanded. Duke looked at the Dralith, then looked at Sam. He did not sit. Lie down, Brix ordered, adding the hand signal. Duke remained standing, his attention clearly on Sam rather than the commander. Brix tried several more commands, growing increasingly frustrated. Duke ignored every single one. The animal was not defiant or aggressive. He simply did not recognize Brix as someone whose commands mattered. Then Brix said, "Come," and took a step forward. Duke growled. It was the first aggressive sound Lyra had heard from him. The animal positioned himself directly between Brix and Sam, his posture protective, his message clear. This stranger was not to be trusted. Sam immediately intervened. Duke, easy? He's not a threat. The growling stopped, but Duke did not relax his vigilant stance. Your animal displays aggression toward a Galactic Council officer, Brix stated. This demonstrates my point about their danger. He was protecting me, Sam countered. You moved toward me in a confrontational manner after he had already assessed you as potentially hostile. He did exactly what he's supposed to do. Foster's crystalline body pulsed with excitement. Remarkable. The animal demonstrates complex social reasoning. He identifies threats based on body language and social context, not simply species or appearance. He differentiates between neutral strangers and potentially dangerous ones. He makes judgment calls independently while still deferring to Sam's assessment of the situation. Brix stared at Duke with an expression Lyra could not quite read. I have commanded soldiers for 30 years. I have seen loyalty built through discipline and respect for authority. This is something different. Yes, Foster agreed. This is something the galaxy has not seen before. This is what happens when a species survives not through becoming the strongest predator, but by convincing the strongest predators to become family. The announcement system crackled to life. The contamination had been cleared. All personnel could return to their stations. The shelter doors began to open and beings started filing out, eager to return to their routines. Foster approached Sam and Lyra one final time. Thank you both. This testimony will be included in Earth's next petition review. I cannot promise the outcome will change, but I can promise the Council will finally see what I have seen today. As they left the shelter, Lyra walked beside Sam and Duke without fear. Around them, Other beings gave them space, but it was a respectful distance now rather than terrified avoidance. Something had shifted during those hours of testimony. The story of a predator who saved lives rather than taking them had spread through the shelter, and beings were reassessing their assumptions. Duke's tail wagged as they walked. Happy to be moving again, happy to be with his human, utterly unconcerned with the galaxy-changing implications of his simple, loyal existence. Life at Frontier Station 7 returned to normal operations within a day of the contamination incident. Merchants reopened their stalls, customers resumed their browsing, and the station's artificial day-night cycle continued its regular rhythm. But something fundamental had changed in how beings regarded the human and his dog in the trading section. Lyra noticed it immediately. The wide berth that other merchants had maintained around Sam's stall had shrunk considerably. Beings still approached cautiously, but their body language reflected curiosity rather than terror. Several stopped to ask questions, their translators working overtime to convey concepts that many languages lacked proper words for. A delegation from the Galactic Council arrived 3 days after the incident. They were not the bureaucratic functionaries Lyra had expected, but scientists, behaviorists, and cultural specialists. Foster had apparently sent a preliminary report that generated significant interest among certain council factions. The lead scientist was a being named Dr. Helix, whose species resembled an upright walking octopus, with bioluminescent patterns across their skin. She approached Sam's stall with obvious fascination, though she maintained a respectful distance from Duke. "I have been studying interspecies relationships for 40 years, Dr. Helix said. Her voice translated into something resembling wind through tunnel networks. "I have documented symbiotic partnerships, parasitic relationships, and everything between. But I have never encountered anything like what humans have developed with canines. May I observe Duke in his working capacity?" Sam agreed, and over the following hours, Dr. Helix watched everything. She observed Duke alerting Sam to an incoming seizure. She recorded how Duke retrieved items, opened doors designed for human hands by pressing specific panels, and maintained awareness of Sam's location even while appearing to sleep. She noted the constant communication flowing between human and animal, much of it nonverbal and seemingly unconscious. Other beings joined the observation. A xenobiologist from a bird-like species wanted to understand Duke's sensory capabilities. A psychologist from an empathic species attempted to read Duke's emotional state and expressed shock at the depth and complexity of what she detected. A military strategist from a warrior culture studied Duke's protective behaviors, trying to understand the tactical applications. Lyra, watching from her own stall, saw Foster arrive and begin coordinating the various specialists. The Krell observer seemed energized by the scientific attention, facilitating discussions between researchers who normally worked in isolated disciplines. During a lull in customer traffic, Dr. Helix approached Lyra. "You are the Quillen merchant who provided testimony about your rescue. I would like to understand your perspective as a prey species. How has your evolutionary programming adapted to extended contact with a predator?" Lyra considered the question carefully. "It is not adapted. Every time I see Duke, my body still produces fear chemicals. My skin still wants to flash warning colors. My muscles still prepare for flight. But my conscious mind overrides these responses now because I have evidence that contradicts my instincts." "Fascinating," Dr. Helix murmured. "You are choosing to ignore millions of years of evolution based on observational data gathered over a few days. This suggests remarkable cognitive flexibility." "Or remarkable foolishness," Lyra admitted. "My family would be horrified if they knew I now voluntarily touch a Deathworld predator. Yet you continue to do so. Why?" Lyra looked over at Duke, who was lying in his usual spot beside Sam's stall. "Because the evidence shows that fear is limiting my understanding. Duke has proven he will protect me, not harm me. Continuing to fear him despite this evidence would be choosing ignorance over truth." Dr. Helix's bioluminescent patterns pulsed in what Lyra's translator interpreted as agreement. "This is the key insight. Humans somehow convinced predators to protect prey. They bridged a gap that should be unbridgeable. The question is whether this ability is unique to human-canine bonding, or if it represents a broader capability." Foster joined their conversation. "That is precisely what the Council needs to understand. If humans can only bond with dogs, it is an interesting biological quirk. But if they can apply this ability broadly, to other species in other situations, then they possess a skill the galaxy desperately needs. What do you mean? Lyra asked. The Galactic Council has been stable for 3,000 years, Foster explained. But stability has come at the cost of stagnation. Species interact through rigid protocols and formal hierarchies. We maintain peace by keeping everyone in their designated place. There is no flexibility, no real cooperation between species that are too different. We coexist, but we do not truly integrate. Dr. Helix added, we have dozens of conflicts that persist because species cannot bridge their fundamental differences. Predator species and prey species serving on the same ships leads to constant tension. Energy-based beings and matter-based beings struggle to find common ground. We accept these divisions as inevitable. But humans do not accept them, Foster continued. Humans look at a wolf, one of their planet's apex predators, and see a potential friend. They take thousands of years and incredible patience to build that friendship into something unbreakable. If they can do this with wolves, what else can they bridge? The implications settled over Lyra like a heavy blanket. You are considering humans not just as members but as mediators. As a species that can facilitate cooperation where it previously seemed impossible. Exactly, Foster confirmed. But we need more evidence. We need to understand if this ability extends beyond canines. As if summoned by the conversation, a human family entered the trading section. They consisted of 2 adults and 3 children of varying ages. But what drew every eye was not the humans themselves but their companions. They had 5 animals with them, and none of them were dogs. Sam's face lit up. Oh, that's the Anderson family. They're traveling back to Earth after a colonial assignment. I met them briefly when I first arrived at the station. One of the animals was clearly feline, smaller than Duke but moving with liquid grace and independent confidence. Another was a bird perched on the shoulder of one of the children, its colorful feathers drawing attention. The third was something Lyra's database identified as a rabbit, a small herbivorous creature that one of the adults carried in a specialized travel container. The 4th and 5th animals were rodents of some kind, small enough to ride in the children's pockets but apparently comfortable enough to poke their heads out and observe their surroundings. Dr. Helix practically vibrated with excitement. They have bonded with a predator species, a prey species, and several species that occupy middle positions in their planet's food web. All coexisting peacefully, all apparently domesticated to similar degrees. The Anderson family approached, and the 2 adults greeted Sam warmly. Their children immediately gravitated toward Duke, asking permission before petting him. Duke's tail wagged, and he greeted the children with the same gentle patience Lyra had observed before. Then something remarkable happened. The cat, which had been maintaining aloof distance, walked directly up to Duke and rubbed against his side. Duke lowered his head and touched his nose to the cat's head in what was clearly a greeting between familiar friends. The bird flew down from the child's shoulder and landed on Duke's back, riding there comfortably while Duke remained perfectly still to avoid dislodging his passenger. They know each other? Lyra asked. We live in the residential section, one of the Anderson adults explained. Duke and our animals have met at the station's pet recreation area several times. They get along wonderfully. Dr. Helix was recording everything frantically, a domesticated predator and a domesticated prey animal showing affection. Both species that should trigger each other's survival instincts, both completely comfortable, and the bird using the canine as a perch suggests trust that defies explanation. Over the next hour, the researchers observed the interaction between the various animals. The cat played with one of the children, showing claws but never using them to cause harm. The rabbit was passed around, allowing even strangers to hold it despite being a species whose primary defense was flight. The rodents performed tricks, responding to the children's cues with obvious intelligence. Commander Brix, who had been observing from a distance, finally approached. His expression was troubled. I come from a warrior culture. We respect strength and dominance. These animals display neither, yet they thrive. The humans do not command through force, yet they achieve perfect cooperation. I do not understand how this is possible. One of the Anderson children, no more than 8 years old, looked up at the imposing Dralith warrior. It's because we love them and they love us. You don't need to be scary to have friends. The simplicity of the statement seemed to strike Brix harder than any complex explanation. He stared at the child, then at the animals, then at Duke, who still had the bird perched contentedly on his back. Love, Brix repeated as if testing the word. Your species believes this emotion can overcome biological programming, evolutionary instinct, and fundamental nature. It's not belief, Sam said quietly. It's evidence. Thousands of years of evidence. Dogs were wolves once. Cats were solitary hunters. Horses were prey animals that could kill us with a single kick. Humans didn't conquer these species. We invited them into our lives and convinced them to stay. Some said yes. We've been family ever since. Dr. Helix was consulting her datapad, reading rapidly. I am reviewing Earth's history of domestication. You have similar relationships with cattle, sheep, pigs, chickens, and dozens of other species. You live alongside creatures that could harm you, eat your food, compete for resources, yet you protect them and they provide for you. This level of cross-species integration is unprecedented in galactic records. Foster's crystalline structure pulsed with what Lyra recognized as satisfaction. This is the evidence we needed. Humans do not simply bond with one predator species through historical accident. They possess a fundamental ability to bridge species differences. They see potential partners everywhere they look. The Anderson family eventually departed, their menagerie of animals moving together peacefully, despite representing multiple positions in their planet's food chain. The researchers remained, discussing implications and generating reports that would be transmitted to the Galactic Council. Lyra returned to her stall, but her mind was far from her fabric displays. She thought about her own people, the Quillen who had spent their entire history hiding from predators. They had built magnificent underground cities, developed advanced technology, created a rich culture based on caution and careful planning, but they had never considered that predators might become something other than threats. What opportunities had the Quillen missed by always choosing fear? What partnerships might they have formed if they had possessed even a fraction of humanity's courage to reach across the predator-prey divide? Duke wandered over to her stall, and Lyra reached down to scratch behind his ears without hesitation. The animal leaned into her touch, his tail wagging slowly. This creature, who could have killed her in seconds, chose instead to be gentle, chose to be her friend. You are teaching the galaxy something important, Lyra told Duke, knowing he could not understand her words but hoping he understood her tone. You are teaching us that fear is not the only answer, that cooperation is possible even when nature says it should not be. Duke licked her hand, a gesture Lyra had learned meant affection, then returned to Sam's side. The human and the animal settled into their routine, unaware that their simple partnership was causing ripples throughout the highest levels of galactic governance. Foster approached Lyra one final time before departing. Your testimony may have changed history. Earth's petition will be reviewed again, and this time the Council will see humans as the galaxy has never seen them before. Not as dangerous deathworlders who should be contained, but as beings who possess a gift we desperately need, the ability to turn enemies into family. As the Krell observer departed, Lyra looked around the trading section. Species from dozens of worlds conducted business, maintained polite distance, followed protocols. It was orderly. It was safe. But was it truly cooperation or just formalized coexistence? Perhaps humanity could teach them all something better. 6 weeks after the contamination incident, Lyra received an invitation that changed everything. The Galactic Council was convening a special session to review Earth's petition for membership, and both she and Sam had been requested as witnesses. The session would take place at Council headquarters, a massive station orbiting a neutron star at the heart of Council space. Sam had closed his trading stall temporarily, arranging for another merchant to watch his inventory. Duke wore a special vest marking him as a certified service animal, though Lyra suspected the vest was more for political purposes than practical necessity. Everyone who mattered already knew what Duke was. The journey to Council headquarters took 4 days through various jump gates. Lyra spent much of that time with Sam and Duke, asking questions about Earth and its many domesticated species. Sam showed her images of his homeworld, vast cities where humans and animals lived side by side, farms where multiple species cooperated in food production, wild spaces where humans worked to protect creatures that had no direct benefit to human survival. Why do you protect animals that cannot help you? Lyra asked, studying an image of humans guarding a nesting site for an endangered turtle species. Because they have a right to exist, Sam said simply. Not everything has to be useful to be valuable. Those turtles have been on Earth for millions of years. We nearly drove them extinct through carelessness. Now we work to make sure they survive. Not because they give us anything, but because a world without them would be poorer. The concept was alien to Lyra. The Quillen preserved their biosphere carefully, but primarily as a resource management strategy. The idea of protecting something simply because it deserved to exist seemed almost irrational, yet also profoundly beautiful. Council headquarters was unlike anything Lyra had experienced. The station housed representatives from over 300 species, each with their own environmental requirements. Sections of the station existed in different gravities, atmospheres, and temperature ranges. Beings that could never survive in the same physical space met through holographic interfaces and translation systems. Foster met them at the docking bay, accompanied by Dr. Helix and several other researchers who had observed Duke at Frontier Station 7. The Council is deeply divided, Foster explained as they navigated through the massive structure. Traditional factions view Earth's Death World status as disqualifying. Progressive factions are intrigued by the evidence we have presented. Today's session will likely determine not just Earth's membership, but potentially reshape how the Council thinks about interspecies cooperation. They entered a circular chamber large enough to hold thousands of beings. Tiered seating rose in concentric circles, each level accommodating different species with their various physical needs. At the center was a platform where witnesses would speak. The acoustics and translation systems were so sophisticated that every being present could hear and understand testimony in real time regardless of their sensory organs. The chamber filled rapidly. Lyra saw species she had never encountered before, some barely recognizable as living beings by her standards. Energy creatures that existed as controlled plasma, hive minds that spoke with one voice through multiple bodies, ancient beings whose individual lifespans exceeded some civilizations' entire histories. The Council Administrator, a being so old their species name had been forgotten and replaced by the title Ancient, called the session to order. Their voice resonated through the chamber, translated into formats that every species could process. We gathered to review Earth's petition for Galactic Council membership. This marks their 15th application. Previous denials were based on concerns about Death World aggression, resource competition, and incompatibility with established peaceful coexistence protocols. New evidence has been presented. We will hear testimony and render judgment. The opposition spoke first. A representative from a species that had suffered greatly in ancient wars with Death World civilizations argued that allowing humans into the Council risked repeating historical tragedies. They presented data on Earth's violent history, its wars, its environmental damage, its apparent inability to live peacefully even with itself. Another opponent focused specifically on Duke. They bring predators into our spaces. They claim partnership, but we see dominance. They have trained these creatures to obey, creating living weapons that could be turned against peaceful species at any moment. Commander Brix was called to testify. Lyra expected him to support the opposition given his initial reaction to Duke. Instead, the Draelith warrior surprised everyone. "I am a soldier," Brix began, his voice carrying authority earned through decades of combat. "I understand weapons. I understand tactics. I understand how species use force to achieve dominance. When I first encountered the human Sam and his animal Duke, I believed I was seeing a subjugated creature, controlled through conditioning and fear. I was wrong." He described the incident in the emergency shelter. Duke's refusal to obey anyone except Sam, the animal's protective instincts and complex reasoning. "This is not a weapon. This is a partner who chooses cooperation. I have commanded troops from a dozen species. None show the loyalty and initiative I observed in this animal, and that loyalty is not enforced through fear, but given freely through bonds I do not fully understand but cannot deny exist." Brix paused, his scales shifting color in what Lyra recognized as deep emotion. "My people survive through strength and discipline. We respect only power. But I met a human child, no more than 8 years old, who told me that friendship requires no force. That child lives surrounded by creatures that could harm her. Yet she fears nothing because she has never been given reason to fear. Humans have achieved something my warrior culture never imagined possible. They have made peace not through dominance but through mutual respect that crosses every biological boundary." The chamber buzzed with reaction. Brix's testimony carried weight specifically because it contradicted expectations. A warrior culture acknowledging that cooperation might exceed force in value, represented a significant shift in perspective. Dr. Helix testified next, presenting her scientific observations. She displayed recordings of Duke's work, his complex decision-making, his ability to assess threats and provide assistance without explicit commands. She showed data on dozens of other Earth animals, each demonstrating similar levels of partnership with humans. What humans call domestication is not subjugation, Dr. Helix concluded. It is an evolutionary strategy unique in our galactic records. They offered partnership to other species and then spent thousands of years proving they could be trusted. The animals that accepted this offer were not conquered. They were convinced. This represents a form of diplomacy that transcends language, operates across species lines, and builds bonds that last millennia. Foster presented the testimonies collected at Frontier Station 7. Beings from a dozen species describing how Duke had helped them, protected them, or simply offered comfort during difficult moments. Each testimony reinforced the same theme. This predator chose cooperation over aggression, chose service over dominance, chose partnership over autonomy. Finally, Lyra was called to testify. She approached the central platform, acutely aware of hundreds of eyes, sensors, and perception organs focused on her. Duke remained with Sam in the witness area, but she could feel the animal's presence even from a distance. "I am Quillen," Lyra began. "My species evolved as prey. For millions of years, our survival depended on avoiding predators. We built our entire civilization underground to escape surface hunters. Fear is not just an emotion for my people. It is our most fundamental survival strategy." She described her first encounter with Duke, the physical terror that had overwhelmed her rational mind. She explained how observation had slowly changed her understanding, how watching Duke work had revealed complexities her evolutionary programming never considered. "Duke saved my life during the contamination incident," Lyra continued. "He risked exposure to toxic chemicals to find me when I was lost and dying. He guided me to safety despite having no survival obligation to a member of a different species. This predator, who should only see me as prey or competition, chose to protect me." Lyra's skin rippled with color patterns that her species used for emphasis. The Quillen survived by hiding. Humans survived by building bridges. They looked at wolves and saw potential friends. They looked at horses and saw potential partners. They looked at the most hostile planet in their region of space and saw a home they loved. This is not recklessness. This is an evolutionary strategy based on radical optimism about the possibility of cooperation. She took a breath, knowing her next words would likely alienate her from conservative elements of Quillen society. "I believe humans can teach the galaxy what they taught me. That fear is not the only answer. That enemies can become family. That cooperation across impossible divides is not just possible but necessary. The Galactic Council has maintained peace through careful separation of species that might conflict. Humans offer something different. They offer integration." The ancient who administered the council allowed time for the testimony to be fully processed by all present species. Then they spoke again, their voice carrying the weight of centuries. "We will now vote. Those who support Earth's membership, present your affirmation." Lights began appearing throughout the chamber, each representing a species or faction indicating support. Lyra watched the count rise, her hearts beating faster with each new light. The progressive factions were voting yes as expected, but she saw lights from unexpected sources as well. Warrior cultures that recognized strength in cooperation, scientific communities that wanted to study human bonding capabilities. Even some conservative factions seemed swayed by the evidence. "Those who oppose Earth's membership present your denial." More lights appeared, though fewer than Lyra had feared. Opposition remained strong among species that valued tradition and stability above adaptation. Some predator species seemed threatened by the idea that cooperation might supersede dominance hierarchies. The ancient calculated for several moments. The vote is decisive. Earth's petition for Galactic Council membership is approved. However, membership comes with specific conditions and responsibilities. The chamber erupted in reaction. Some species celebrated while others protested. The ancient waited for quiet before continuing. Earth will be granted full council membership with the following provisions. First, humans will serve as mediators for interspecies disputes where traditional diplomacy has failed. Their demonstrated ability to bridge biological and cultural divides will be utilized to resolve conflicts that have persisted for generations. Second, humans will establish cultural exchange programs, teaching other species their domestication and partnership techniques. Third, Earth will share its biodiversity data and conservation methods. As their planet represents one of the most complex biospheres in the known galaxy, despite its hostile classification, Sam was called to the central platform to receive the official acceptance. He approached with Duke at his side, and Lyra saw hundreds of beings watching the dog with new understanding. This was not a weapon or a curiosity. This was the evidence that cooperation could transcend any divide. The ancient addressed Sam directly. Your species brings something unprecedented to this council. You have shown us that the boundaries we believed absolute are actually permeable, that predator and prey can become family, that Deathworld survivors can be gentle, that love, as you call it, might be a more powerful force than any weapon or technology. Sam bowed respectfully. Humanity is honored to join the Galactic Council. We hope we can live up to the responsibility you've given us, but I need to be clear about something. Duke isn't just a symbol or a demonstration tool. He's my partner, my family, and I won't go anywhere without him. The ancient's response might have been amusement, though Lyra could not be certain given the being's alien nature. We would not ask you to. That bond is precisely why you are here. Your inability to imagine abandoning your partner despite political convenience is exactly the quality we need. Over the following days, Earth's integration into the Council began. Lyra watched as Sam participated in planning sessions, often with Duke lying calmly beside him. The animal's presence became less notable as beings grew accustomed to seeing human and dog together. Several species requested meetings specifically to observe Duke and ask questions about partnership bonds. Commander Brix approached Sam during a break in meetings. The Dralith warrior carried something in his hands. I have contacted my homeworld. I have requested that our biologists identify creatures on our planet that might be compatible with partnership bonds. We have always viewed our world's fauna as resources or threats. Perhaps we have been missing something important. Sam smiled. It takes time. Thousands of years in Earth's case, but if you're willing to try, to offer trust and see if it's returned, you might be surprised at what's possible. Lyra made her own decision during those days at Council headquarters. She would return to her homeworld, but not to continue her family's trading business. Instead, she would establish a cultural exchange program, bringing young Quillen to meet Earth's animals in controlled environments. Her species had spent too long hiding underground. Perhaps it was time to learn that the surface held potential friends, not just threats. On the final day before departing Council headquarters, Lyra found Sam and Duke at an observation deck overlooking the neutron star. The view was spectacular. Matter streaming through space in patterns that defied description. You changed the galaxy, Lyra said, standing beside them. Duke changed the galaxy, Sam corrected. I just followed him around and tried to keep up. Dogs have been changing humans for thousands of years. Guess it was time they started working on the rest of the universe. Duke's tail wagged, and he pressed his head against Lyra's leg. She scratched behind his ears, the gesture now automatic and comfortable. This creature had taught her that fear could be overcome, that trust could be extended even to those who seemed most threatening, that family could include members who shared no genetic connection whatsoever. The galaxy was about to learn the same lessons. Humans would serve as teachers, but creatures like Duke would be the real educators. They would show species after species that cooperation was possible, that loyalty could cross any boundary, that love was not a weakness, but perhaps the greatest strength any being could possess. Lyra looked out at the neutron star, at the massive station orbiting it, at the hundreds of species that had come together to build something larger than any single civilization. The Galactic Council had existed for 3,000 years based on careful protocols and maintained distances. Perhaps it was time for something better. Perhaps it was time for family. Duke barked once as if agreeing with her thoughts, and Lyra found herself laughing. A Quillen and a Terran predator, standing together watching cosmic wonders, proving that the universe was more flexible and more beautiful than anyone had imagined. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in her species' history, Lyra looked forward to it without fear. If humans could convince wolves to become companions, what else might be possible? What other impossible bridges might be built? What other enemies might become friends? The galaxy was about to find out, one partnership at a time.